During the live broadcast on a major television network, right after Congresswoman Ilhan Omar boldly stated that Donald Trump was unfit for the White House, no one anticipated that mere minutes later, she would be the one systematically dismantled by a stack of documents he had ready. Trump effectively turned what was meant to be a political ambush into a historic counteroffensive, laying bare a series of controversies that threatened to unravel Omar's career in under 90 minutes. That evening, the entire country was glued to the CNN broadcast, where the America Town Hall had been hyped for weeks as the ultimate showdown. This was far more than a standard policy debate. It was the highly awaited clash between President Donald Trump and the freshman congresswoman who positioned herself as the vocal champion for immigrants and minorities. The network and press corps were convinced this night would mark the moment. Trump was finally cornered regarding his hardline immigration policies and polarizing rhetoric. They assumed Ilhan Omar, cultivating the image of a fierce and intellectual debater, would be the one to make Trump stumble in front of millions of viewers. Leading up to the event, the production crew had prepared with obsessive detail as directors and media strategists met continuously to engineer the perfect stage. They curated an audience with a calculated demographic mix, balancing Omar supporters, Trump loyalists, and undecided voters to generate an atmosphere that would exert psychological pressure on the president. Cameras were angled to capture his every micro-expression, while a control room full of fact-checkers stood by, ready to interrupt Trump the moment he made a factual error on air. The network believed that with this elaborate setup, they would score a rating sensation while cementing Ilhan Omar's status as the icon of a new generation challenging the old guard. Backstage, the vibe between the two camps could not have been more different. Omar's green room was packed with aides, communication experts, attorneys, and image consultants. Everyone clutched binders and laptops, frantically exchanging talking points and gotcha phrases for her to deploy during the broadcast to catch him off balance. Omar sat before a vanity mirror, adjusting her bright red hijab, a color deliberately selected to project confidence and symbolize power against the debate's backdrop. Her coaches repeatedly reminded her to maintain her composure and smile through his attacks, assuring her that the moderators would likely tilt the field in her favor. Despite the prep, Omar's eyes held a flicker of anxiety, though it was masked by the belief that she was about to make history by taking down the president. In stark contrast, across the hallway, Donald Trump appeared with an eerie calmness, completely devoid of the chaotic energy often ascribed to him. There was no entourage, no commotion, and no frantic advisors. It was just him, a Diet Coke, and a worn leather binder marked with yellow sticky notes. Trump sat flipping through the pages, occasionally chuckling as if reviewing a script he had already memorized, treating the high-stakes event as just another day at the office. For him, this showdown was not a trap, but a golden opportunity to bypass media filters and speak directly to the American people without interpretation. For years, he had been the target of relentless media attacks, particularly from figures like Omar, whom he viewed as the embodiment of political aggression without accountability. Now, he had the chance to respond in his preferred manner, directly, forcefully, and without apology. Precisely at 8:00 p.m., the studio lights surged, and hundreds of audience members rose to applaud as Omar made her entrance. She smiled radiantly, waving to the crowd, projecting confidence with every stride as the stage lights made her red scarf pop against the blue backdrop. Moments later, the applause intensified as Donald Trump appeared, clad in his signature dark suit and long red tie, wearing an unwavering smile of supreme confidence. He walked out deliberately, pausing to acknowledge the crowd, before settling into the chair opposite. Omar. The air in the studio instantly grew heavy, as if two colliding worlds and ideologies were about to crash into each other before a national audience. Moderator Jake Tapper introduced the segment, stressing the need for civil discourse, though the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Trump offered a slight, tight-lipped smile, a mischievous glint in his eyes as he adjusted his lapel mic and took a deep breath. But before Tapper could even pose the first question, Omar interjected, her voice sharp and authoritative, seizing the initiative. I believe the most critical thing to state up front is that President White Trump does not deserve to occupy the White House, as he embodies policies that tear us apart. A buzz went through the studio as many applauded, and the cameras zoomed tight on Trump's face, which held that same unbothered expression. This was the moment the network thought they had secured a viral clip, unaware that this statement was the trigger that would reverse the entire dynamic. Trump leaned forward slightly, smiling, and responded in a tone that was warm yet heavy with implication. Thank you, Ilhan. You look very elegant tonight. But you are right about one thing. Tonight we are going to discuss who truly belongs where. The comment, superficially polite, caused Omar to hesitate, realizing this was not the defensive outburst she had anticipated. Trump leaned back, rested his hand on the binder, and added, I actually brought a few interesting items that the network might want to display. The audience murmured while Omar frowned, unable to pivot quickly enough, marking the exact moment the media narrative began to tilt against her. Trump had not come to debate abstract concepts. He arrived with the singular goal of dismantling his opponent using public records and data accumulated over years. The atmosphere felt like the stillness before a hurricane, quiet but charged with static, as the moderators exchanged nervous glances. Jake Tapper looked between the two, attempting to hold the center, but he realized he was about to referee a brawl rather than manage a conversation. From the camera angle, viewers could see Trump quietly opening his file, turning a few pages, and smiling to himself under the harsh studio lights. Neither the network executives nor Omar's extensive team suspected they were witnessing the opening tremors of a political earthquake. That night, they thought they were putting Trump on the defensive, but within minutes, the person trapped was not him, but the woman who had entered as a symbol of moral judgment. It all began with the network's hubris and the belief that a freshman politician could outmaneuver a media veteran who had survived countless public battles. They forgot one crucial detail. Donald Trump was not just a politician. He was a master of television who knew instinctively how to bring a room to his side. Tonight, he was prepared to demonstrate that skill to the entire world. As soon as the host concluded the intro, the tension in the room spiked to a fever pitch. Ilhan Omar, striking in her red scarf and holding a steady gaze, proactively took the floor before a question was even asked. She didn't wait for a prompt or an introduction. From the very first second, Omar launched a frontal assault. I think it is time for America to face the truth. President Donald Trump is unfit to sit in the White House, she declared. He is a symbol of division, and he has spent his entire term attacking immigrants and people who look like me. The auditorium rang with applause, interspersed with whistles of approval, which seemed to embolden her further. Omar, with self-assurance, thinking she had just scored the opening point in front of millions of viewers. Jake Tapper glanced at the director via the monitor, signaling that they had captured excellent footage for the highlight reel. It seemed like a golden moment, a young immigrant congresswoman daring to stand up and dress down a powerful president on live TV. Ilhan Omar knew she was being filmed in close-up, so she slowed her cadence, articulating every syllable so that each word landed like a prepared political message. "He doesn't just attack me," she continued. "He attacks the very values America is supposed to uphold: diversity, tolerance, and religious freedom. We cannot remain silent and allow a man of his character to represent this nation." The section of the audience supporting Omar clapped enthusiastically, with several standing to record the moment on their phones. Backstage, her team exchanged smiles, convinced the script was playing out exactly as they had simulated. The network had hoped for this precise energy, a strong emotional opening that evoked empathy and would force Trump to stumble under public scrutiny. They assumed he would lose his cool, react harshly as he often did, and reinforce the caricature of an impulsive president unable to regulate his emotions. But in the opposite chair, Donald Trump sat perfectly still, his hands clasped, a faint smirk playing on his lips. His eyes didn't show anger, but rather intense observation, as if he were waiting for the perfect opening to strike back. When Omar concluded with the line, "President Trump is the shame of America," the room erupted in cheers. Immediately, the camera cut to Trump, and the studio fell into a hush, waiting to see the explosion. Trump tilted his head slightly, his voice warm and laced with a touch of sarcasm, yet remarkably steady. "Thank you, Ilhan. You look great tonight, and I have to say that red scarf suits you very well." Scattered laughter rippled through the auditorium, effectively diffusing the tension. He then continued, "You say I don't belong in the White House, that I am America's shame. But perhaps tonight we should have a serious conversation about who truly doesn't belong." That sentence made Omar pause, her smile faltering as her eyes betrayed a flash of confusion. Jake Tapper prepared to interrupt to pivot the topic to immigration policy, but Trump continued as if he were the one running the show. "Before addressing policy," he said, "I think the American people need to be reminded of a few things you have said, things that many people found deeply insulting." Trump raised a hand to signal, and instantly the large screen behind him queued up a video. It was an archived clip of Omar speaking at a CARE fundraising event, where she discussed the aftermath of September 11th. Her voice echoed through the studio. "Some people did something, and that all of us started losing our civil liberties." The video cut to black, and the space fell into a heavy silence as Trump looked around the room and slowly repeated her words. "Some people did something," he said, emphasizing the vague phrasing she used to describe a cataclysmic tragedy. He paused, his voice suddenly dropping to a somber, serious register. "I was in New York that day, Ilhan. I saw the smoke rising from the Twin Towers, and I watched them come down. I went to Ground Zero. I saw the rubble. I saw the flyers for missing loved ones plastered on every wall. More than 3,000 Americans were murdered, and you referred to them as some people?" A murmur of unease rose from the audience, and Omar's face tightened. She attempted to interject. "I meant that, but..." Trump steamrolled over her. "No, Ilhan," he cut in, his voice ringing clear and steely. "I don't think you grasp how New Yorkers feel when they hear you speak like that. You were welcomed by America at the age of 12, educated here, protected here, and became a congresswoman. Yet when you mention the day thousands of Americans were slaughtered, you speak with total indifference. You say, 'I don't deserve the White House.' Perhaps Americans should ask, who really doesn't belong here?" A burst of unexpected applause broke out, not just from Trump by loyalists, but from the neutral bloc as well. The camera panned to Omar, who pressed her lips together in an effort to remain composed, but she was visibly rattled. In a few short minutes, the momentum had violently shifted in the other direction. The network had intended to stage a battle where Omar was the prosecutor, but Trump had turned that very attack into a fierce counter-opportunity. And Omar tried to salvage the moment, claiming those words were taken out of context. Trump chuckled softly, shaking his head. There is no context that makes that statement acceptable. You cannot minimize that tragedy with such casualness and expect people to believe you love this country. The room was dead silent until a single person in the crowd clapped, followed by a few others, until the sound swelled into genuine applause. On Trump's face, the confident smile returned as he looked at to Omar, his tone lighter but still cold. You claim I divide the country, but perhaps you should look in the mirror when your words make millions of Americans feel disrespected. From backstage, Omar's team began to panic. Their prep sheets and reaction scripts were useless against this specific line of attack. She had planned to hit Trump on emotion, but he was countering with cold facts and collective national trauma, something no one could easily dismiss. In minutes, her advantage evaporated, and the network couldn't cut the feed because the program was live and the audience was captivated. When Jake Tapper tried to steer the conversation back to the agenda, Omar had not yet regained her footing. Trump was different. He scanned the room and slowly said, I may be criticized and hated, but at least I always tell the truth about what I believe. I love this country, and I stand here today not to attack anyone, but to remind us that if we do not respect the nation that gave us opportunity, we do not deserve its freedom. That was the moment the audience exploded, the applause roaring like a breaking wave. Omar sat frozen, her eyes arting. Her attack, calculated to drown Trump, had become the prelude to the fiercest counterpunch of his political life. From an accusation, he turned the stage into a platform to demonstrate patriotism, pride, and the resilience of someone the media often discounted. That night, with just a few opening sentences, Trump made Ilhan Omar realize she was not facing a standard politician, but a master of the stage. He understood that in the age of media, raw emotion and symbols are far more powerful than any policy accusation. Trump allowed the clip to play out fully without interruption, understanding the rhetorical power of silence. When the audio in the video ceased, he turned to the audience, his voice deepening to give weight to every syllable. Some people did something, he repeated, highlighting how she trivialized the memory of those who died in the fire and smoke. He paused, looking directly at Omar. I saw the faces of agony, mothers weeping for children, children searching for fathers. I will never forget that scene, and I know no American can forget it. He spoke slowly, his tone no longer combative, but solemn, even genuinely emotional. The entire auditorium was as silent as a tomb, with no one daring to speak. Trump looked up, straight into the camera lens, his gaze piercing through the screen to reach millions of viewers watching at home. And then, 18 years later, a member of our Congress, someone saved by this country from a war zone, raised here and educated here, speaks of that day as if it were a minor inconvenience. Those 3 words are not just disrespectful, Ilhan. They are an insult. Omar gripped the microphone until her knuckles turned white, trying to force a smile, but it looked pained and distorted. I didn't mean to insult anyone, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I just wanted to say that, she began, but Trump cut her off, maintaining his calm demeanor. No, you don't need to explain. Because there is no way to justify that indifference when people lost parents, children, and friends. They don't need you to say, some people did something. They need you to say, we will never forget. But you couldn't bring yourself to say that. You spoke as if America was the problem, and that, Ilhan, is the real issue. Whispers rose again in the room, some nodding in agreement, as a close-up of Ilhan Omar's face was shown on the monitor. Her eyes blinking rapidly, her breathing shallow, though she tried to sit upright. Said Trump turned to the audience, his voice rising, taking on the cadence of a campaign rally. She came to America at 12, was protected and given opportunities millions only dream of. This country sheltered her and her family from conflict, educated her, and let her stand here right on American soil, before the American flag. And then, having gained everything, she cannot show respect for those who fell to protect this country. That sentence caused the room to erupt in applause, with many leaping to their feet. A few scattered. Omar's supporters tried to react, but the applause drowned out everything. Trump stood up, reading from no papers, needing no teleprompter. He spoke as if every sentence was etched in his soul. You say I don't deserve to be in the White House. I was elected by 63 million Americans. They put me there because they believed I would protect this country. But you cannot even protect the memory of those killed right in the country that saved your life. So I ask you, Ilhan, who is the one who truly doesn't deserve to be here? A long, thunderous round of applause rang out, and Omar's confidence wavered. She opened her mouth to speak, but Trump raised a hand to signal a stop. Don't rush, he said quietly, but decisively. I'm not finished. He turned to the audience and then looked straight into the lens. Those lost on 9/11 cannot speak for themselves. They cannot fight back. But we can. We can say that America will never forget and will never allow anyone in any position to minimize that pain. The audience stood in unison, clapping incessantly, with chants of USA breaking out while Omar sat silently, averting her gaze. Tapper tried to regain control of the program, but clearly the audience was no longer paying attention to his moderation. All eyes were fixed on Trump, who had just turned an insult into a speech that shook the room. Trump sat down, his voice returning to a calm baseline. You say I divide America, he said, but you are the one dividing it when you plant the idea that patriots, those proud of their country, are the enemy. I don't hate immigrants, Ilhan. I love those who come here, work hard, respect the law, and love this country. But I cannot respect someone who mocks the lives lost for our freedom. Omar B. responded weakly. You are twisting my words. I just wanted to say that Muslims have suffered discrimination after 9/11. Trump cut across, his voice hard as granite. No one here supports discrimination, but there is a boundary between protecting your community and insulting an entire grieving nation. You crossed that line. His words fell like a sledgehammer, and once again the room erupted in cheers. Trump's supporters waved miniature flags, chanting his name as cameras panned across the stands, recording images of audience members wiping away tears as he spoke of his memories of New York. In that moment, the debate ceased to be politics. It became a display of raw national emotion. As the applause gradually subsided, Trump leaned lightly against his chair, looking toward Omar with a faint, knowing smile. You want to debate me on immigration policy? I am ready. But if you want to lecture me on what patriotism is, you have chosen the wrong opponent. The entire room laughed, some cheered, and in the glare of the studio lights, Omar sat silently, looking down at her hands. In just 10 minutes, the network's entire game plan had collapsed. Instead of witnessing Trump floundering, they broadcast the moment he set the studio ablaze with a spontaneous speech full of emotion and power. From the moment Trump seized on the phrase, "Some people did something," the tide of the confrontation completely turned. And Omar was no longer the challenger. She became the defendant in the court of public opinion, where every word and action from her past became evidence against her. After the atmosphere in the studio settled, Trump looked around as if giving the audience time to breathe after the emotional climax. He did not rush, merely taking a sip of water and leaning back, a familiar half-smile reappearing. "You say I divide America, Ilhan," he began, his voice low but resonating clearly through the audio system. "But perhaps the American people need to hear a few things you have said yourself. Not things I made up, but words you wrote, words the whole world has seen." As he finished the sentence, whispers rang out in the room. Omar frowned slightly, looking at him with suspicion. Trump tilted his head to signal the tech team, and on the large screen behind him, screenshots of Twitter feeds appeared. Old tweets from Omar stood out sharply against the social network's signature blue background. The first line appeared, a tweet from 2012 regarding Israel, followed by another concerning American political support, where she infamously tweeted, "It's all about the Benjamin's baby." For a few seconds, the room was dead silent. Trump slowly stood up, pointing at the screen like a professor lecturing a student. "You call that critiquing policy? No, that is the language of hostility." He walked slowly closer to the screen, his voice booming stronger, emphasizing every word as if each were a gavel strike. The first sentence, "It's all about the Benjamin's baby." Benjamin refers to the $100 bill. You said that when discussing American politics and the Jewish people. What was your implication? That Jewish people buy politicians with cash? That is one of the oldest and most dangerous anti-Semitic tropes in history. He pointed to the second tweet, implying Israel had hypnotized the world. You suggest Israel uses magic to manipulate humanity. Do you know that is propaganda once used by hate groups? Omar bit her lip, trying to stay calm, grabbing the microphone to speak quickly. I was talking about the Israeli government, not Jewish people. I oppose their actions. Trump raised a hand to cut her off. You can oppose policy, but you cannot insult an entire people. When you say Jewish people use money, you are not just attacking a government. You are attacking a religious community that has been persecuted for thousands of years. And the funny thing is, your own party, Ilhan, the Democratic Party, had to condemn you twice for these statements. He returned to his chair, opening the thick file on the table and pulling out 2 sheets of paper with the official House letterhead. Here, he held up a sheet. House Resolution 183 condemning all forms of anti-Semitism, passed because of you, proposed by your own party leaders. He noted as a buzz rose from the audience. Some Omar supporters booed, but many neutral viewers gasped in surprise. Trump continued, his voice now dripping with sarcasm. It is impressive, isn't it? When a party that protects all its allies has to publicly criticize you. Perhaps the problem isn't me, but you. Omar tried to force a smile, her voice rising with a mix of confusion and defensiveness. You are trying to twist the truth to divide us. I am Muslim, and every time I speak up, I am labeled anti-Semitic. That is the reality people like me have to live with. Trump couldn't help but chuckle softly. Ilhan, you are in America. Here, People don't silence anyone because of religion. But when you say things that insult an entire people, you will be held accountable, not because you are Muslim, but because you are saying things that are wrong. He paused for a beat, then turned to the audience, his voice becoming more intimate, as if chatting with the crowd. Let me ask you, if I posted a tweet saying, "It's all about the welfare, baby," when discussing programs for the poor, what would you call me? A few people in the room shouted, "Racist!" Trump nodded, pointing at them. Exactly. They would call me a racist, and they would be right. But when Ilhan says, "It's all about the Benjamins," regarding Jewish people, they call it free speech. What a perfect double standard. Laughter mixed with applause rang out. Omar looked around, trying to find allies in the crowd, but Jake Tapper's expression showed he also found it hard to defend the tweet. Trump returned to the dossier, turning another page. "I could go on all night," he said, "because the list of these types of statements from you is very long. But there is an interesting thing. Every time you are questioned, you say people are Islamophobic. You turn every criticism into Islamophobia. But Ilhan, sometimes people don't hate your religion, they just hate hypocrisy." The entire room seemed to echo with a long, "oh," reacting to the sudden verbal takedown. And Trump turned to Omar, his voice slow and sharp. "You cannot claim to represent justice while sowing prejudices that have caused millions to suffer. You cannot stand in the U.S. Congress and say colleagues are hypnotized. You say I cause division. Look back. You are the one doing that." Omar could not answer. She just looked down at the table, hands clasped. Perhaps for the first time that evening, she felt truly cornered. Trump seized that moment to end the counterattack with a harder tone. "I don't need anyone to teach me about fairness. I have worked with Jewish people, Muslims, and people of all colors my whole life. But I know one thing. If we start judging people by their ethnicity or religion instead of their actions, America will no longer be America. And unfortunately, that is exactly what you are doing." Once again, applause roared through the room, surging like a wave, with many standing to clap incessantly. Omar remained silent, her eyes looking far away. Jake Tapper looked at his watch, knowing the program had gone far off the original topic, but he dared not cut it. All eyes were poured on Trump, who had once again completely taken over the stage with the demeanor of a media master. Trump didn't need to scream. He just used what was available, her own past words, to make her collapse before the public. When he sat down, the audience was still buzzing. Many shook their heads. Some exclaimed, "I didn't know she said that." Those sentences echoed throughout the room like an invisible verdict for Ilhan Omar. From that moment, Trump had not only won on logic, but also captured the hearts of the audience with the most potent weapon in politics, the memory and emotions of the American people. Trump sat still for a moment after the applause ended, his eyes gleaming with the calm of someone who knew he still had many cards to play. He slowly opened the briefcase again, turning to the next section of documents, papers marked with colored stickers. "We have talked about statements and attitude," he said, his voice lowering slowly. "But what about actions? Americans have a saying, words can lie, but papers cannot." A soft gasp rang out in the room. Omar frowned slightly, sensing a bad omen. As Trump yet continued, "I think it is time to talk about something many people have wondered about for a long time, the serious discrepancies in your public records." The room suddenly went dead silent. Omar immediately looked up, reacting almost instinctively. "I don't think my private life," she began, but Trump raised his hand to signal a stop, his voice steady and unhurried. No, no, I understand private life is private. But when private life involves immigration papers, tax filings, and U.S. law, it is no longer private, Ilhan. He opened the dossier, pulling out a sheet of paper and holding it up. This involves a series of confusing filings regarding your history, specifically questions surrounding your tax returns during your marriage to Ahmed Elmi. Omar was silent, a flash of confusion crossing her eyes. I don't deny, she said softly, but I don't understand what you are aiming at. Trump interrupted. So let me help you understand. He signaled the technical team, and on the large screen behind him, a timeline appeared. Neatly presented, it showed a complex web of licenses and tax filings involving different individuals and overlapping dates. There are serious questions here, Trump said, pointing to the chart, his voice calm but loaded. You filed taxes jointly with one man while legally married to another. That is not just a mistake. That is a violation of tax code. And you were fined by the Campaign Finance Board for irregularities. A murmur rose in the room. Jake Tapper looked around, trying to signal the crew not to leave the graphic up too long. But Trump commanded the stage. Omar had held the mic, her voice hardening. I have addressed these issues. They are clerical errors. This is a smear campaign and an insult, she insisted. Trump smiled gently, cutting in. I am not insulting anyone, Ilhan. I am just reading public documents confirmed by the state of Minnesota. And what is interesting is the lack of clarity regarding the purpose of these unions and the identities involved. Critics have asked for years for simple documentation to clear up the rumors, yet you refuse. The air in the room became stifling. Omar looked around, seeking help, but no one interrupted. Trump. He took a step further, his voice slowing. I am not saying the rumors are true, but there is a series of evidence that makes people suspicious. And instead of transparency, you choose silence. As president, I learned one thing. People can lie with their mouths, but records do not know how to lie. Applause rang out, not thunderous, but sustained. Trump looked at the audience, then turned back to Omar. I understand, he said, his tone softer. Anyone can make mistakes, but you are not a normal person. You are a congresswoman. You placed your hand on the Bible and swore to uphold U.S. law. If you truly committed fraud to bypass the system, that is not a personal mistake. That is an act of betraying the public trust. Omar took a deep breath, trying to suppress her anger. You are slandering me. You have no proof. This is cheap politics to discredit me. Trump laughed lightly, replying, I have enough evidence to ask questions, Ilhan, and you have no evidence to deny them. That is the difference. He paused, looking straight at the camera, his voice echoing through the studio. American citizens, those watching this program, ask yourselves, if a person can lie about their own legal records, can they be honest with the country? That question spiraled like a blade deep into the silent space. Jake Tapper wanted to intervene, but the atmosphere was completely dominated by Trump. A few audience members stood up to applaud in agreement. One shouted, "Answer him!" Omar turned her face away, not responding. Trump continued calmly, I am not here to humiliate anyone. I am here to ask the questions the press should have asked long ago. They dare not because they are afraid of being called racist. But I am not afraid. I just want the truth. He gently closed the dossier, his eyes sharp, like he had just ended a chess game he knew he had won. If you have nothing to hide, Ilhan, prove it. But if you have something to cover up, America deserves to know. Applause rang out again, stronger and longer this time. Someone in the room shouted, "USA, USA!" and the crowd quickly joined in. Omar sat there silently, her face gradually becoming stiff. On the screen, the image of the timeline and documents still shone behind, like pieces of a story she could not erase. Trump didn't need to say anything more. He just smiled, bowed his head to thank the audience, and turned to the host with a look that said, "I just gave her a chance to defend herself, and she couldn't." That night, when the program aired, social media exploded. Clips of the video and the images Trump showed in the studio spread everywhere. Although the full truth of the marriage story remains a subject of intense debate in the eyes of millions of viewers. Ilhan Omar's image was heavily damaged. As for Trump, he not only won a debate, but also regained the initiative in the entire media battle. It all started with a thick dossier of silent papers that contained the power of a fatal strike. Trump gently closed the section on the marriage controversy, but the room was still buzzing. He didn't rush to change the subject, sitting quietly for a few seconds, as if letting viewers digest what they just heard. Then he looked up, straight at an Ilhan Omar, a faint smile passing by. "We have talked a lot about the past," he said, his voice light but clear. "Now, let's talk about the present, where money and power intersect." Immediately, he opened the dossier to another section, pulling out a thick stack of papers with the Federal Election Commission (FEC) logo. "I believe, Ilhan, you will recognize these numbers," he said, holding up the documents for the camera to capture. The atmosphere in the studio immediately tightened again. Omar Bekas tilted her head slightly, trying to look casual, but her eyes were wary. "These are expenditure records from your campaign over the last 2 years," Trump said, his voice steely. "According to official data, your campaign paid over $2.8 million to a consulting firm called the E Street Group. The name sounds familiar, right?" He paused, looking straight at her. "That is the company owned by your husband, Tim Minett." A gasp rang out across the room. Omar gripped the microphone, reacting immediately. "That is a transparent contract, fully audited. Everything is legal and declared." "Everything is legal, huh?" Trump cut in, his voice rising a notch, carrying a bit of sarcasm. "Legal, maybe, but what about ethical?" He stood up, walking toward the large screen where a new timeline appeared, presented clearly like a television investigation. 2018, Minett starts as a consultant for the Ilhan Omar campaign. 2019, Minett's wife files for divorce, citing an affair with congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Same year, Omar also divorces. 2020. Omar marries Minett. From then to today, Minett's company received $2.8 million from your campaign funds. Trump slowly pointed at the screen, his voice lowering. "You hired a man as a consultant, then had a romantic relationship with him while both were married. Then you divorced, he divorced, you two married each other, and immediately after, his company became a partner, paid millions from your own campaign. I've done business for 50 years, and I can smell a self-dealing scheme from a mile away." The room erupted again, with widespread whispering. Omar tried to react, her voice becoming harsh. "I do not control that contract. My team chooses partners based on capability, not personal relationships." Trump laughed, a laugh full of disdain. "Capability? Let me guess. The capability to write invoices. Because, according to detailed records, your campaign paid over $780,000 for travel expenses. Where did you two fly that cost nearly $800,000? Why not just call it a global honeymoon?" The whole room laughed out loud, and many applauded. Jake Tapper tried to intervene. "We need to keep the discussion within policy," but Trump raised his hand to block him. "This is not a private matter, Jake. This is about using people's donated money. When she calls for fighting for justice, when she says every donated dollar helps bring a voice to the weak, people don't think that money will flow into her husband's pocket." He held up a paper, listing items in a clear voice. $1.2 million for strategic consulting, $650,000 for media production, $420,000 for fundraising support, totaling $2.8 million, all signed for by your husband. "I have hired hundreds of consulting firms in my life, Ilhan. No one charges prices like this unless they are writing invoices for themselves." Omar tried to retort, "You are making things up, things. Every expense is checked by the FEC, and the FEC has not found violations. You can hide behind the law, but you cannot hide from the people," Trump said immediately. "You say you fight for the poor, but where are the poor? You live in a $1 million house, wear designer clothes, and travel business class with your husband who is paid by your campaign. Is that the new style of social justice?" Sarcastic laughter spread across the stands, mixed with long applause. Omar began to lose her composure. "I do not need to endure such sexist and personal attacks," she said loudly, her voice breaking. Trump looked at her, his smile fading, his voice harder than ever. "Don't drag gender or religion into this to cover up the truth. If a male congressman did the same thing, paying millions to his wife's company, he would also be questioned. This is not attacking women. This is attacking corruption." He turned to the audience, his voice persuasive. "The people who sent money to your campaign are not billionaires. They are teachers, nurses, workers, people who believed they were helping a representative of the people fight for them. But you turned them into a revenue source for your family. In business, I call that defrauding customers. In politics, I call it betraying public trust." The room exploded in applause. Many stood up, shouting, "Shame!" Omar sat stiffly, her face pale. As Trump turned back to the table, putting down the stack of documents, his voice becoming deep. "I have been accused of many things in my life, but I have never taken a dime from the people to enrich my family. I built an empire with my own effort and risk. You built a career by withdrawing money from the trust of others. That is the difference between a business person and an opportunist." Once again, the applause lasted long. The camera panned through the crowd, many nodded, some whispered exchanges. Trump sat down, his eyes looking straight at the camera, his voice returning to calm. "I am not here to smear anyone. I just want the American people to see that behind beautiful slogans are sometimes numbers that do not lie. $2.8 million is not an accusation. It is just a fact." When he finished speaking, the room was silent for a few seconds, then rang out with shouts of "USA, USA!" extending. Trump sat still, just nodding slightly in thanks, while Omar sank into her chair, trying to avoid the camera lens. Every light, every shout echoed back like a reminder that in this political game, sometimes you don't need to scream or threaten. You just need to present the numbers, the vouchers, and let the public see the truth themselves. That night, Trump did exactly that, and with a thick dossier, he made every defense of his opponent vanish into thin air. Trump sat quietly for a few seconds after the long applause, his eyes narrowing slightly, a sharp gaze directed straight at Ilhan Omar. There was no longer the gentle sarcasm from before. The atmosphere gradually turned cold and serious. He knew he had led the conversation to a point of no return, and now was the time to deliver the final blow. A strike aimed not just at reputation, but at the very root of the audience's trust in his opponent. Trump put the thick dossier down on the table, opening it to a section marked in red. "We have talked about money, about marriage, about honesty," he said, his voice deep but echoing through the room. "But perhaps the most important thing has not yet been said. That is, how you view this country and its enemies." The whole room was dead silent. Ilhan Omar frowned slightly, trying to force a cold smile. "I don't know what you plan to fabricate next, but I certainly won't let you turn me into a symbol of hatred." Trump tilted his head slightly, replying in a calm voice, "I don't need to fabricate anything, Ilhan. I just need to replay what you said in your own voice." He signaled the technical team, and on the large screen, a video began to play. It was an old interview where Omar talked about her time as a student. She spoke about a political science class and terrorism, then laughed when mentioning how the professor pronounced the word Al-Qaeda. As she recounted it, her hands raised to make air quotes, a small gesture, but carrying terrible weight. She said, "My professor said Al-Qaeda with a serious tone, but when mentioning America or England, he didn't do that. Why the difference?" The video ended, and Trump said nothing for a few seconds, letting the silence spread. Then he slowly asked, "What did she just say to us? What did she just do when mentioning Al-Qaeda?" He raised his two hands, mimicking Omar's air quotes gesture. "Al-Qaeda," he said, his voice full of sarcasm. "She put quotation marks around terrorist organizations that killed thousands of Americans, as if they were just vague concepts, as if terrorism is something debatable." The whole studio rang with angry whispers. Trump stepped forward, his voice dropping deep. "Al-Qaeda killed 2,977 Americans on 9/11. Hezbollah killed 241 U.S. Marines in Beirut. Those organizations are not ideas, not victims of the West. They are enemies, people who took the lives of our citizens. And you, Ilhan, make quotation marks when mentioning them, as if they don't exist, really." Omar took a breath, trying to respond. "You are misunderstanding my point. I just said we need to look at the root causes of conflict." "Root causes?" Trump cut her off, his voice hardening. "You are justifying terrorism. There is no root cause that makes someone fly a plane into a skyscraper full of innocent people. There is no reason to kill children, behead hostages, or plant bombs in buses. And if you don't understand that, perhaps you have forgotten where you are living." The room exploded in applause. Many stood up, shouting, "USA!" Trump did not stop. He signaled, and another video appeared. It was footage of Ilhan Omar speaking in Somalia amidst a large crowd. She spoke in Somali, her face radiant, raising her hand high to wave like a leader returning to her homeland. Below, thousands clapped and chanted her name. Trump let the video play for a while, then paused on the image of Omar, standing amidst the sea of people, smiling radiantly like a national symbol. "This was your trip in 2022, Trump said. "You are a U.S. congresswoman, paid by American tax dollars, yet you organized a political rally in Somalia where you were hailed as their leader. And listen closely to this part." The video continued playing. Omar speaking in Somali. "They asked where we come from. Tell them we come from the greatest country, Somalia." Trump paused the video, turned to look at the audience, his voice becoming slow and heavy like a hammer blow. Not, "We come from America." Not, "We are proud to be Somali Americans." But, "We come from Somalia." spoken in your language, at your old homeland, with unconcealed pride. So who do you represent, Ilhan? To whom did you swear allegiance? Omar shook her head, trying to defend herself. I am proud of my roots as an immigrant. I have the right. You have the right to be proud, Trump cut across. But you do not have the right to put your old identity above your new nationality. When you swore your oath of office, you said you would protect the U.S. Constitution, not Somalia. You cannot raise your hand to swear allegiance to America and then raise your hand to greet thousands in Mogadishu as if you were their prime minister. Applause and shouts of America first spread across the room. Trump sat down, then stood up immediately after, his voice gradually becoming animated like a grand oration. You can come from anywhere, speak any language, have any skin color, but once you become an American citizen, there is only one flag to bow to, only one fatherland to protect. And if you cannot clarify which side you stand on, then you do not deserve to represent the American people. The room exploded in applause and cheering. Omar held the mic, trying to counterattack. I always fight for justice, for peace, for humanitarian values, and you call justifying terrorism humanitarian? Trump blocked her, his voice like a cold blade. You talk about peace, but criticize America every time we eliminate an enemy. You talk about justice, but turn a blind eye to those who bomb churches, attack women, and kill innocent people in the Middle East. That is not justice, Ilhan. That is sophistry. The entire room stood up, the applause sounding like thunder. Omar was silent, her eyes looking down, daring not to face him anymore. Trump turned to the camera, his gaze severe. The American people don't hate you because you are an immigrant. They are disappointed because you forgot the reason you were saved. You were brought here to have freedom, to be safe, to have a future, and you respond by criticizing this country, smearing it, standing on the side of its enemies. That is not gratitude. That is betrayal. He paused, his voice slow. You asked, did I divide the country? No, Ilhan. You divide it when you make Americans wonder if the people they saved still love America or not. And that is something I will never let happen. Applause rang out again, louder than before. Some audience members shouted, USA! Others just stood silently with tears in their eyes. In that moment, Trump was not just a debater. He became a symbol of the deep patriotic emotion of millions watching through the screen. Omar bowed her head, her lips pressed tight. She knew any defense now would only make her look weaker. Trump looked at her, his voice lighter but full of authority. No one forces you to love America, but if you have chosen to be here, chosen to serve in the Congress of this country, then do it with absolute loyalty. Because the American people deserve leaders who are grateful to the country that sheltered them, not those who treat it like a mistake that needs redeeming. When he finished, the room exploded in long, unceasing applause. The stage lights reflected on Trump's face, while Ilhan Omar quietly looked down, hands clasped. The debate was no longer a policy exchange, but a test of loyalty, and Omar had failed miserably. The atmosphere in the studio seemed to thicken after Trump's final words. The entire auditorium still echoed with applause, mixed with thunderous shouts of USA, USA. Ilhan Omar sat silently, looking down, her face cold as ice, but unable to hide the confusion and fatigue. Trump was different. He did not appear arrogant, but strangely quiet. He took a deep breath, as if about to say the most important thing of the evening, then stood up, holding the microphone, looking across the room. His voice was deep and powerful, ringing like a bell in the silence. "You say I divide this country," he began, "but I think what is dividing us is not partisanship, not skin color, but love for America. Some people love this country deeply, ready to fight for it. Others just live here, enjoying everything it gives, yet despise it." He turned to look at Omar, his eyes sharp as a knife. "You say I should be ashamed of this country. I say, no, I am proud of it. And if you hate it that much, if you only know how to stand there criticizing and smearing, then I have a simple piece of advice." He paused, then enunciated every word, his voice echoing through the room. "Love it or leave it." The room exploded. Cheers rang out violently. People stood up, many raising their hands high, clapping rhythmically. Some even wept with emotion. That phrase, "love it or leave it," just 4 short words, but it rang out like thunder amidst a stormy political sky. A Trump did not shout or scream, speaking in a normal voice, but every word had the power to pierce through millions of screens broadcasting live across America. Omar looked at him, her lips trembling, intending to react, but unable to speak. She just shook her head, trying to force a stiff smile, but the audience was no longer listening to her. The entire studio was swept away by the intense emotional current. Many shouted, "Tell them, Mr. President," and "That's right," while clapping incessantly. Cameras panned across the room, recording radiant faces, clenched fists, and small American flags waved high in the boiling atmosphere. Trump stood there, lights illuminating his face in chiaroscuro, like a symbol. He continued speaking, his voice suddenly full of emotion, no longer an attack, but like a whisper. "I was born here, grew up here. I have seen America go through war, crisis, terror, division. But never have I seen America lose its soul, because despite disagreements, we still love this country. And when someone comes here, is sheltered, lives freely, then turns around saying America is terrible, that it needs to change to fit their will, then I'm sorry, they don't understand what America is." Applause rang out again. A man in the front row, wearing a military jacket, saluted. Trump saw him and nodded. His voice boomed louder. "I have met soldiers who lost legs in war, but when I asked if they regretted it, they said no, because I fought for the greatest country in the world. That is true love. As for you, Ilhan, you sit in Congress, receiving a salary from the people. But every time you open your mouth, you criticize America. You say Americans are enemies, are racists. You say police are murderers. But it is police who protect you every day. It is the Americans you despised who voted for you, believed in you, and you respond with hatred." Omar Mipursuch held the mic, trying to say something, but the chants of USA drowned out everything. Trump did not stop. He continued, his voice now carrying the weight of a true orator. "America is not perfect. No one is perfect. But it is the only place on this earth where an immigrant child from Somalia can become a member of Congress. And if that is not enough to make you love it, then perhaps nowhere can. Love it or leave it. Love it or leave it." A long applause stretched endlessly in the room. Someone cried. A white woman hugged an American flag, with tears falling. A black man stood up, raising his hand. "I love America." Cameras panned to those faces, tears rolling down cheeks, then turned back to Trump, who stood straight, not smiling, not arrogant, just silent, like a person who had spoken what he believed was the truth. Ilhan Omar bowed her head. She knew every rebuttal now was futile. In this debate, Trump was no longer speaking privately to her but speaking to all Americans. to their emotions, pride, and beliefs. Every sentence he spoke touched the deepest layer of the audience's hearts. The network had expected Omar to flush Trump, but now they were witnessing him shake all of America. Trump closed his microphone, turned to the host, his voice calm. "I don't hate her. I just want her to understand that this country deserves to be loved, not despised. And if someone feels they cannot love it, the door is always open." The room exploded once again. Cheers rang out like a storm. People chanted, "Love it or leave it," like a slogan, a vow, a new manifesto. When the program ended, millions of Americans at home remained glued to their screens. That phrase, "love it or leave it," was shared all over social media in just minutes. The hashtag "love it or leave" it climbed to the #1 spot globally on Twitter. Thousands of comments, videos, and posts flooded every platform. Those who once criticized Trump had to admit that it was one of the most powerful moments in political television history. Omar left the studio in silence, avoiding all questions, while Trump walked out, shaking hands with waiting citizens. His smile returned, calm, confident, and somewhat satisfied. A reporter asked loudly, "Do you think that phrase will be controversial, Mr. President?" Trump turned back, flashing his signature smile, and replied succinctly, "Only those who don't love America will find it insulting." That night, hundreds of TV stations, newspapers, and political commentary channels replayed the "Love It or Leave It" segment. But the special thing was that, regardless of side, everyone agreed that moment defined the entire debate. It was not just a saying, but a clear boundary. Either stand with America or against it. Trump not only won the exchange, he did much more. He touched the spirit of national pride, rekindling the flame of patriotism in the hearts of millions. That sentence, in just one night, became a slogan, a symbol, a new flag for those who believe America is still great, still worthy of love, with all faith, respect, and loyalty. After the debate ended, the auditorium lights dimmed, but its aftershocks spread across America like a media tsunami. The phrase, "love it or leave it," echoed across news bulletins, from TV to radio, from social media to street corner cafes. Those previously indifferent to politics began discussing and resharing the video of Trump, standing center stage, mic in hand, articulating every word like an oath. To his supporters, it was a magnificent moment where patriotism was awakened more fiercely than ever. But for Ilhan Omar, it was the beginning of a nightmare. The very next morning, major newspapers simultaneously ran headlines. Trump demolishes CNN debate. Ilhan Omar fails miserably on live TV. Love it or leave it. The phrase redefining American politics. Left-leaning news agencies tried to defend Omar, but all efforts became lost before the massive wave of public opinion. Clips of Trump exposing every allegation, from the "some people did something" remark to financial and marriage controversies, spread at dizzying speed. In just 24 hours, the clip was shared over 50 million times, appearing on every platform, every newscast, every conversation. People no longer called it a debate, but a political trial on live TV, while Trump was praised as the one bringing America back to pride. Ilhan Omar faced the rapid collapse of the image she had built for years. Her office in Minneapolis received thousands of protest calls. Local newspapers began digging deep into tax records, marriage papers, and controversial transactions in her campaign. Even TV channels that once supported her had to admit Omar was falling into a severe crisis of trust. Inside the Democratic Party, there was chaos. Many veteran members silently expressed disappointment. An anonymous party source revealed to the press, "We tried to protect her many times, but what happened on TV is unjustifiable." Some Congress members avoided mentioning Omar's name in public statements. Even the Speaker of the House was forced to answer press questions about whether Omar still represented the party well. Meanwhile, voters in Minnesota, where Omar was once seen as a symbol of hope and change, began to turn their backs. Those who once proudly hung her photo in diners and grocery stores now quietly took them down. A Somali-American woman said on TV, "We were proud when she was elected, but now she makes the whole community viewed with suspicion." Major donor organizations also gradually withdrew. One key donor announced cutting all funding, stating, "We cannot continue supporting a politician losing public trust." Simultaneously, the Federal Election Commission reopened her campaign expenditure files, requiring Omar to provide more documents on payments to her husband's company. Though there was no official conclusion yet, this was enough for the media to rehash every prior accusation. From marriage to taxes to ethics. The more she tried to resist, the more Omar bogged down. She held a press conference, standing before dozens of cameras declaring, "This was a systematic smear campaign orchestrated to silence an immigrant daring to speak the truth." But throughout the conference, she failed to answer any specific questions regarding the evidence. When a reporter asked about campaign funds going to her husband's firm, she only said, "That is a private family matter." That answer was immediately quoted by news outlets with sarcastic headlines. "Private matter worth $2.88 million." The collapse came not just from traditional media, but also from social media, where Omar was once a symbol of youthful progressive politics. Former supporters began questioning her. The hashtag #OmarResign entered the top 10 trends in just hours. A 10-second compilation video titled "How Omar's Career Collapsed" reached over 200 million views on TikTok, contrasting her "Some people did something" with war Trump hears "Love it or leave it." 3 weeks after the debate, Omar's approval rating in her district dropped to a record low, from 61% to 28%. A rising opponent of Ethiopian descent announced a run for her seat with the slogan, "Bring Pride Back to Minnesota." Local TV stations called it an unprecedented political uprising. Even those close to Ilhan Omar's campaign began to leave. Some quietly looked for other jobs. A former advisor said in an interview, "I don't think she understands the consequences of what happened. Everything is out of control." Pressure mounted daily. Small protests erupted before her congressional office. Many voters carried banners reading "America First" and "We Want Normal." Initially, Omar ignored them, but as the number of protesters grew and major news outlets covered it, she could no longer remain silent. Her communications team met urgently, even suggesting a temporary withdrawal to avoid tension. Finally, after nearly 2 months of enduring intense pressure, Omar appeared in a short video posted on Twitter. She spoke slowly, eyes tired. "I have gone through the hardest weeks of my political life. I love America, and I don't want controversies around me to further hurt people's trust. Therefore, I will temporarily withdraw from the spotlight to reflect and spend time with family." The video was only 2 minutes long, but upon posting, it spread rapidly. Many called it an unofficial resignation letter. The press simultaneously ran titles, "Ilhan Omar retreats after massive public pressure." The network that organized the debate became a target of criticism for completely misjudging the power of the people's reaction. And so, in less than 2 months, the political career of an Ilhan Omar, once praised as a symbol of a new generation of immigrant women of progress, collapsed completely. She left in silence, with no farewell ceremony, no applause. On the other side, Donald Trump became the center of the nation. Every rally of his thereafter echoed with the chant, "Love it or leave it." The phrase from that evening had transformed into a new political slogan, appearing on T-shirts, hats, and posters across the states. That night, when everything settled, a newspaper wrote, "Trump did not just win a debate. He rewrote the history of American media, where truth, patriotism, and the power of belief defeated all artificiality." And somewhere in a small room in Minneapolis, Ilhan Omar was perhaps watching that fateful broadcast again, where in just minutes her entire career and reputation vanished before the brilliant light of 4 words, "Love it or leave it."